Hello. This is a video in my continuing series of examining different aspects of human design body graph or human design in general that allow me to do what I'm calling intuitive synthesis of a human design body graph. These are not things which are particular to me, these are just the big elements that if we become familiar with them, they can really serve us in forming our own sort of woven narrative, weaving different narratives of our own chart or somebody else's chart. In this video, I want to talk about the lines of the hexagram. When you're looking at a basic human design body graph with the two columns of numbers on the side, there are 13 on each side, and there's a decimal point at on each of the numbers. On the left-hand side, I think for the video it's on this side, on the left-hand side of each decimal there's a number between 1 and 64 corresponding to the 64 hexagrams, which then correspond to the 64 gates within a human design body graph, in the body chart. So if you pick any one of those numbers, 14 for example, and you can see it, you have one of those numbers in one of those two columns, have that number in one of the two columns. If you look down into the center where the body chart is, you will find, you'd have to look for it, in this case it's on the sacral center towards the bottom but pointing up towards the G center, the number 14. It will have a circle around it of color, and then the associated channel will be colored in red, black, or striped red and black. So that's a lot. That's one of those levels of really intimidating information, 64 gates. How do I navigate that? Much of what we're doing in synthesizing all these different aspects of information is realizing that if we're following the narrative of the energies as they come together in the expression of one of these gates, that we get to have a deep sense of what the information, what the name, what the information provided, say in Linda Bunnell's book or through the International Human Design School, any of the authorized information, those sources, we'll see that they match, that we can understand how they work together. So the ideal is just having this deep personal sense of what these energies are, and then also ultimately being familiar with the information side of things, if that's what you're interested in. But that's the gift of having these intuitive or these building blocks, is that we don't need to memorize names and numbers and then try to decipher what that means. We can uncover the meaning and then see the relationship to the label that's applied to it. So, all those 64 numbers, intimidating. But on the right-hand side of the decimal for each number is a 1, a 2, a 2, a 3, a 4, a 5, or a 6. That's all, 6 numbers. And that might seem intimidating in itself, but these numbers themselves embody a narrative. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is the structure of a hexagram. It begins with the first line, second line, third, fourth, fifth, sixth. And this is a transition, this is a transformation, this is a narrative of energies, of ways of being in the world, that if we can construct a narrative and understand how 1 is related to 2, 2 to 1, 2 to 3, etc., then we're less lost. What we're really trying to do is just understand the story of the journey from 1 to 6, and then 6 back to 1, ultimately. But if we just understand this block of narrative, then we're not concerned with what is 2, what is 3. They're not separate things. They're aspects of a holistic journey which have their unique contribution, very much like us. So what I'll be doing is just laying out a narrative, a story about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. The first line is investigative. It's an investigator. It's like a scientist in some sense, has its nose down. It's not too worried about the external world. It's not a social orientation necessarily. It's information gathering. It's attempting to find some sense of security and certainty in a world which is fundamentally unknown. So the one comes in without knowing. It's uncertain in a sense, but it has a deep drive to be certain. So it tracks down what makes sense. It tries to pull things together. In gathering these things, it's building a foundation. That first line of the hexagram upon which everything else is built, that's the first line contribution. So the one is not necessarily intentional about what it is pulling together, the kinds of experiences or the things that it's interested in and assimilating. It's not necessarily for the purpose of, it's really not for the purpose of sharing with others or doing anything with. It's just an orientation to meet the chaos of the world and to transform some patch of it into a place of certainty. Okay. The second line is dancing upon the foundation built by the first line. It's an expression of being that benefits from all the work done by the first line and sort of integrating that stuff with the world around it, but it's doing it in an unconscious way. Right? The second line is not interested in the foundation. It doesn't really even know that it's there, but it will dance effortlessly and engage with life on the basis of that. On that foundation, it will move up to the edge gracefully, and all that area is covered by the beauty of the second line. So it's engaging with life, and it's affecting life, but it doesn't know that it's something like a transmission a bit of that first line. So you can ask a two to personify it. You can ask a two, how do you know that? How do you know how to do these things? It doesn't know, and that makes it uncomfortable. It's just an expression of being, of life, on top of this really sort of different orientation, which is the first line, trying to find security and certainty. The second line is a little more uncertain. It's a little okay with not knowing. It sort of has to be. And in finding that it doesn't have to know, it can sort of flow and move upon that foundation. A third line sort of echoes the first line a bit in that it is information gathering, but it's experiential this time. Whereas the two on top of the foundation from the one is dancing in this really graceful, beautiful way up to the edge of the foundation, but never over it. The third line falls off the edge and then finds itself rolling down the hill and in a place that it hadn't expected. It's sort of moving beyond wherever that first line had established things, and it's pushing the boundaries and discovering beyond a graceful uncertainty of the two that is certainly contributing things. The third line is really stretching. It's really out there in the world beyond sort of this unconscious expression of the first line. It has the benefit of those first and second line experiences inside of itself genetically, but third line is really going out there, getting the potential for the real new, for the really, for what constitutes a real discovery. So it has a quality of adventure in a sense. It's beyond, it's left the foundation. It might not have wanted to, but it can't stay on the foundation. Its energy is always moving it beyond itself. And it doesn't know where it's going necessarily, but what is gained experientially feeds back in to this system, right? To this strata of information and experience that's being built. The foundation of one, the unconscious sort of participation and expression, second line, and then this mutative third line experience, which is out into the world and bumping into things beyond the first line. So it's bringing in a broader context, a broader span of experiences. So here we make a significant transition to the four, in that we have two trigrams in every hexagram. Trigram just meaning there's three lines. So we have the first, second, and third lines in the bottom hexagram, bottom trigram, and the top trigram, fourth, fifth, and sixth, and there's a mirroring here, right? So 1 and 4, 2 and 5, 3 and 6. As we make this transition between the two trigrams, we make a substantial jump into moving the what's been garnered, what's been learned and gained through the first, second, and third experiences, which were really just sort of here in terms of their awareness, not outward oriented, not trying to affect the world. It's got a quality of internality, right? The first line is just, what is the truth? How do we figure this thing out? The second line is, I don't know, it doesn't really matter, I can do it, it's not an issue, I don't have to know. It's not trying to tell you, it doesn't want to be, overly affected, it doesn't want you to bother it, but if you can dance with it, that's cool. A third line is like, it's adapting. It's always encountering experiences which are unknown and sort of foreign and not, which can't be relied upon by this first line, so it's having to do a shift and a dance. But it's much more related to the world, right? Fourth line, we make the significant transition to the social world. The fourth is a networker. It's interpersonal. It's really about who is this person. I'm interested in people as a four. That's where we've made this transition in life from gaining a sort of foundation to now, how does the information move between groups of people, and certainly between groups of people by virtue of networks from one to one to one to one to one to one, etc. So the four is now sort of carrying what's genetically encoded from the first, second, third lines into shaking the hand and making this direct transmission between myself and another person through a conversation, right? Has a keynote of the opportunist, which it can have a negative connotation, but it can just be opportunity in terms of someone's capacity to be receptive to information that you want to externalize, to communicate as a four. What's behind it in the first, second, third line experience through the four can go into another person. When it's there, it goes somewhere else. So this is the spread of ideas, spread of perspectives, cultural shifts, but also things as mundane as disease, right? It's the vector of connection between individuals. But this is a profound place. One-to-one connection is powerful, right? In keeping communities together and uniting them. When you get to the fifth line, it's something like, I think of it as a higher octave of the four. So the fifth line sees social structures. It's a bit above the interpersonal one-to-one. So that has a quality of feeling above. It's not concerned so much with that one-to-one. It's seeing social structures as a whole, and so it's seeing bigger issues and has a sense that I can fix those things. I'm aware of these larger issues. I have a higher vantage point. Therefore, I should fix them, right? I can do that. So it has a kind of self-belief in that sense because it's oriented at this higher level. And what comes with that is a really profound projection field. Projection field, for me, is just like it's an electromagnetic charge that when someone meets a five, fifth line, they receive this intense charge that lights them up, right? And in this being lit up, there's a narrative that goes along with it. There's a projection that this person has the answers to my problems. This person really can solve these societal or systemic issues that they say they can, or even if it's just in my life. That's just the way that this mechanic works. In order for this fifth line to have a big effect, it needs this projection field, right? All these things are woven together at this level. It's significantly different than the four and everything below it. So whether it's in one-to-one engagement or engagement of the five to a broader social sphere, a group of people, the intensity of the projection field, which is going to be received by each one of those people, if it's in a group setting, they're all going to be projecting onto this person as a sort of savior. That's what allows information to really fly through, right? You can deliver to large groups of people, and because they're so receptive and because they're so oriented, their orientation is so positive, they're going to implement whatever it is that you offer as a solution, as a five. In which case, if you give them something and they can go out and do it and it works, then it's just going to spread. They're going to tell other people. Lots of people are going to know. It's going to move really quickly. Okay, Again, relative to a 4 tells you what to do, you do it, it works for you, then you tell one other person, But a 5 is like, woof, everyone at the same time, so to speak, in whatever the little setting is. Conversely, the stress for a 5 necessarily, the other side of this dynamic is that if what is provided is not practical, if it doesn't work, that projection field shifts. Like there's a collapse and a polarization of the projection, such that the degree to which you were projecting positive aspects onto this person, then become the opposite. It becomes an intensely negative orientation. You lied to me. This doesn't work because of you. You did this thing to me. And it's just really distorted. So that's a lot of tension for a 5. It's a very, very different social game than the 4, obviously. So the ideal for the 5 is to provide something which is practical, which can be received and really benefit people. And then for the 5 to sort of keep them away because you want to be able to manage the intensity of that, the repercussions of carrying that projection field. What you give people has a charge, and so it's just something that the 5 has to manage. So we've gone from the 1, foundation building, only foundation building without even knowing that it's going to benefit or that anything's going to be built on top of it, building that down in there. Second line, life living on top of that foundation, not really knowing how it knows the things that it knows. Those first line things are internal. A beautiful way of that stuff affecting the world in a different way, being lived, expressed. The third line falls off the edge of that foundation. It's building a larger body of knowledge by virtue of exploration and adventure and mishap, by just going into places that no one has explored before. How are we going to know if we don't move beyond what we know? The 4 is taking those things, all that sort of information, which is now in itself genetically, and it's moving it beyond into the next person. We're engaging overtly in the social domain here on the level of one-to-one interaction. Fifth line is social, but hyper-social in a sense, like just beyond the level of one-to-one. I'm seeing more than you. Those of you who are just concerned with the one-to-one, the 5th line has an energy of, I've got something for everyone. And again, these things are not judgmental at any level, in that we all have different lines. Like, not everyone's going to have every line all the time, but most people are going to have each line to some degree. So when you can find these aspects in your chart, that's where it's fun and helpful, and you can weave these narratives together. And having a sense of humor about these things is ultimately the most healing thing, I think. So all of this to say, here we've sort of marked this significant movement from gathering information, living it, gathering even more information, delivering information one-to-one, and then making a cultural shift or societal or tribal change on the basis of everything that's been explored as we come up. The 6th line is not about production in the way in which all these lines sort of have a flavor of being production oriented. It seems to have a purpose, right? That you're cultivating something and then moving it out into the world. The 6th line is about embodying the experience of living out a life path, right? It's not about something necessarily. It doesn't carry all the attendant, it's something it can struggle with, but ultimately in the sort of purified way of thinking about it, doesn't carry all these dreams or these aspirations. It's not identified with all of the work that's necessary to get up to the social, nor is it identified with the social. It's living something in a different way. It has a significantly different life path, the 6. It lives as a 3rd line up to the Saturn return. Then it gets sort of a respite of Saturn. Remember, 3rd line is this sort of trial and error, going beyond where you know things to be. You get a respite from Saturn return to the Chiron return, and then at the Chiron return you sort of enter the world again at the level of a 3rd line engagement, but as a 6, having been affected, you've been changed by life. So the sixth line has a quality of being that is the results from living. It's been changed and affected by life. It's not learned something in the sense in which you might say it now has lessons to give. It's just been deeply sort of cellularly transformed by the process of life itself, which carries its own frequency that affects others. This is an energy that you feel drawn to, that feels like it has some depth and wisdom, that's got a quality which is substantially different than a projection in which you think you're going to get something from someone else, or if they have something to give you. It resonates more with the feeling of, I want to be like that. There's something significant about the way this person is that I resonate with. So you're dealing with something which is sort of moves us beyond all of the energy and the struggle, without judgment, all of the intensity of living through these lines is embodied there, but it's not engaged with it. It doesn't have an agenda. It's the sixth line is a transition which is waiting for the next first line. It's sort of this very subtle in-between liminal space between the fifth and the first line in the mandala that surrounds the human design body graph. Right? So it's this place where you've really soaked it in. You've absorbed the qualities of this, whatever hexagram it is, in your own unique way. You contribute by virtue of being. You've got an experiential way as a sixth line, and sort of making way for the next lesson, the beginning of the next lesson, which is the first line. So before, it's like the sixth is sort of asleep in some sense. It's awake in the world, but it's dreamlike in that it's not outcome oriented. And then in awakening from the sixth, the first line is there again to begin finding the foundation for the next hexagram, and so on and so forth. When you can integrate these stories, these ways of being, and understanding them in the context of the six lines, you can present information to a person in such a way that they can really resonate to it experientially. The profile, of course, is where a lot of this bears the most fruit. In the context of looking at individual gates, that can be interesting, but gates in the context of a channel, in which you can have any one of the six here and any one of the six here, that enmeshment is so nuanced and subject to the shifts in the experiences of life that it becomes a bit meaningless to talk about. It's really superficial. It's trying to integrate those narratives at that level, I think, not that helpful. But in the context of profile, that is, at the numbers of the hexagram, the lines of the hexagram, on either side of the top, sun and earth, on either side, the conscious and the unconscious, right? It's going to have like a 1 twice, and then it's going to have a 3 twice, or other combinations for the profile that we can get into and look at in another video. In the context of the relationship of those two numbers, you can really weave some really fun and interesting narratives that a person's going to recognize immediately. Understanding the relationship between a 1 and a 3, and understanding the 1 as a conscious orientation and the 3 as an unconscious, you can begin to weave these things together, and that's a lot of fun. Again, something that a person will benefit from. And with having an awareness of that, you can then sort of weave that thread, certainly, into everything else that you're looking at in someone's chart. So I hope that wasn't too much. I hope it was clear. Let me know if you have any questions.